You followed the path they told you to, checked every box, achieved the goals, and yet you wake up with this ache. It's not depression, it's not failure, it's emptiness, the kind that comes when the soul has been silenced for too long. Today, we're not going to talk about motivation. We're going to talk about meaning, and why finding it might be the most important thing you ever do. The ache you can't explain. There's a kind of pain that doesn't bleed. It doesn't show up in blood tests or break your bones. It walks quietly beside you, wearing your smile, going to your meetings, making small talk at dinners. And yet, inside, something feels off. You can't explain it. Because technically, you're fine. You've done the things you were supposed to do. You got the job, the degree, the relationship, the place to live. You've built the version of life that looks stable from the outside. But on the inside, you often feel like a stranger inside your own story. And here's the part no one talks about. You can have everything right and still feel profoundly empty. Not because you're broken, not because you're ungrateful, but because something essential has been left behind. Not forgotten exactly, but buried, silenced. And it speaks through strange symptoms. The constant restlessness, the inability to feel present, the endless scrolling, binge-watching, distractions, the fatigue that doesn't go away with sleep, the quiet moments where you suddenly feel a lump in your throat for no reason at all. This is the ache of the unexpressed self. The soul, ignored for too long, begins to whisper. And when you don't listen, it starts to ache. Not in ways that scream, but in ways that hollow. Carl Jung once said, "Thoroughly unprepared, we take the step into the afternoon of life, with the false assumption that our truths and ideals will serve us as they did in the morning." And this is what many feel but can't articulate. That what once motivated you, status, success, approval, now leaves you cold. Like biting into food that has no taste. You keep chewing, but it doesn't nourish you. This ache you carry, it's not depression, although it might feel like it. It's not laziness, even if you're struggling to care about things. It's not a personal failure. It's your deeper self trying to get your attention. It's the shadow, the forgotten voice, the deeper you that was never meant to disappear under the noise of productivity and performance. And still, you show up. You answer emails. You meet deadlines. You smile on cue. But inside, a question lingers. Is this all there is? This isn't something you admit out loud because it feels ungrateful or even shameful. How can someone who's doing well be quietly falling apart? But the truth is, you're not alone. And this pain is not meaningless. It's not random. It's a signpost. A soft but steady signal that your soul no longer wants to survive. It wants to live. And to live, truly live, you'll need to do something you may have never done before. Stop. Listen. Ask real questions. Not about what to do next, but about who you truly are, underneath it all. Because the ache you feel isn't the enemy. It's the invitation. The life you built versus the life you need. Let's be honest, you didn't build your life randomly. You built it to survive, to succeed, to feel safe, or to prove something. And you did it well. You followed the script handed to you by family, school, culture. You learned how to play the part. Be responsible. Don't make mistakes. Be liked. Make them proud. Don't disappoint. At first it worked. You got applause, approval, results. But somewhere along the way, the performance became the reality. And now, the roles you play, worker, partner, achiever, caretaker, have started to eclipse the person you actually are. Here's something most people never realize. You can outgrow a version of yourself and still feel obligated to keep performing it. You keep showing up to a life that no longer reflects you, because it once made sense. Because people expect it. Because changing now would mean disappointing others. Or worse, it would mean admitting to yourself that you've drifted far from who you really are. James Hillman called this the betrayal of the soul. He believed that the soul arrives in the world with a unique code, a pattern, a shape, a calling, not necessarily a career, not fame, but something only you can express. And when you live too far from that truth, the soul begins to suffer. That suffering doesn't always look dramatic. Sometimes it looks like boredom. Sometimes it looks like burnout. Sometimes it looks like waking up and thinking, I just can't do this again. It's in the quiet moments. Driving home in silence. Scrolling through your phone with no desire. Sitting at dinner and feeling numb. That the tension between the life you've built and the life you need begins to show itself. You feel it as a kind of friction. Like wearing a suit that no longer fits. Tight around the shoulders, uncomfortable at the seams. But you keep wearing it. Because taking it off would mean standing there exposed. Carl Jung said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." But what if that person was buried under years of performing, pleasing, adapting? Here's a truth you won't hear in productivity books. Sometimes what you're calling laziness is actually resistance from your soul. Not to work, not to effort, but to continuing a story that isn't yours. Your procrastination may not be a lack of discipline. It might be your inner voice saying, "This isn't what I came here for." And that voice gets louder when everything gets quieter. When the noise of goals fades, when the emails are done, when the phone is silent, that's when the truth knocks. And it doesn't ask, "What do you want to achieve?" It asks, "Who are you becoming?" What would your life look like if you weren't trying to prove anything? What does your soul need, not just to function, but to feel alive? We're not talking about abandoning responsibilities. We're talking about remembering yourself. You can keep parts of the life you built, but you also have the right to edit the story, to re-enter it, not as a character playing a role, but as the author, because the life you built got you here. But it's okay if it's not the life that will take you forward. The soul's language. What psychology forgot to teach us? There's something psychology doesn't always explain. Something that science can measure but not truly capture. Something that therapy can help you manage, but rarely dares to name. That something is your soul. And no, this isn't about religion or belief systems. This is about that deeper part of you. The part that doesn't speak in logic, but in longing. The part that doesn't care about goals, but about meaning. James Hillman called the soul the essence of who we are, imagined deeply. And he believed something radical. That our symptoms, our anxiety, our fatigue, our confusion, are not failures. They are messages, clues, attempts of the soul to speak when we've stopped listening. But here's the problem. We were never taught the language of the soul. We were taught the language of achievement, of status, of performance. Think about it. From childhood, we learn to answer questions like, what do you want to be when you grow up? How will you succeed? What's your 5-year plan? But no one asked, what breaks your heart in a way that also moves you? What beauty do you see that others ignore? What do you feel called to express, even if no one ever claps for it? Carl Jung believed that every soul has a natural direction, an inner compass. He called this process individuation, the unfolding of the self into its most authentic, complete form. But here's the truth. Most people never begin that journey, because it requires facing the parts of you that got buried, the shadow parts, the creative parts, the vulnerable, strange, emotional, intuitive parts that didn't fit into the world you were told to adapt to. And so, you became good at surviving. But the cost was silence. Not external silence, but internal muting, a quieting of the soul's desires so that you could function. But here's the miracle. The soul doesn't give up. It waits, and it speaks. Through resistance, through sadness, through dreams, through art, through restlessness. Napoleon Hill, though known for success, hinted at this when he wrote, "There is a difference between wishing for a thing and being ready to receive it. Being ready isn't just mental, it's spiritual. It's alignment, and the soul can't align with a life that betrays its truth. That's why you might feel stuck, because you're trying to move forward using the tools of the ego, logic, discipline, pressure, to solve a problem that's coming from the soul. And the soul doesn't respond to pressure. It responds to listening, to space, to reflection, to silence, to truth. This is where traditional self-help often fails. It tells you to grind harder, to push through, to outwork your doubt. But what if your doubt is sacred? What if your resistance isn't weakness, but wisdom? You're not here to become a machine of productivity. You're here to become yourself. Not the self others expect. Not the self you perform to feel accepted. But the real one, raw, strange, alive. And to do that, you have to learn a new language. The language of the soul. It speaks in what makes you cry for no reason. It speaks in what draws you, without logic. It speaks in the longing that keeps returning, no matter how much you ignore it. That longing is not a problem. It's a direction. It's a seed. And in that seed is a version of you, not yet lived, but already waiting. The question is not, what should I do with my life? The real question is, what part of me is trying to live? And am I finally ready to listen? When the soul resists, what your anxiety and procrastination are really saying. You try to sit down and work, but your body won't move. You open your laptop and stare at the screen. You make a to-do list and feel more overwhelmed than before. And instead of getting things done, you scroll, you pace, you distract, you blame yourself, again, for being lazy, weak, undisciplined. But what if you're not broken? What if your procrastination is not a failure, but a signal? We've been taught to interpret every pause as a problem, every moment of stillness as laziness, every hesitation as a character flaw. But the truth is, sometimes the soul resists what the ego tries to force. Let that sink in. You're not procrastinating because you don't care. You're procrastinating because part of you cares too deeply about truth, about meaning, about integrity. And that part of you knows when you're pushing yourself towards something that feels off, toward tasks, jobs, roles, conversations, goals. That might serve your image, but not your essence. Carl Jung believed that when the conscious mind is misaligned with the deeper self, tension builds. And that tension often appears as anxiety, fatigue, confusion, or procrastination. Let's be honest, you've tried to fix yourself. You've set deadlines, used productivity apps, written morning routines on mirrors. But none of it lasts, because the issue isn't your habits. It's your direction. You can't force your soul to care about something it doesn't believe in. And that is the hidden wisdom inside your resistance. James Hillman once said, "We dull our lives by how we conceive them." Maybe your life feels heavy not because you have too much to do, but because you've stopped seeing it as sacred, because you've reduced it to a checklist, because the way you're living lacks depth, beauty, and resonance with your true nature. Imagine this. A musician is handed an instrument that doesn't match her voice. She plays, but the sound feels off. She keeps trying, practices harder, but the dissonance doesn't disappear. It deepens. Eventually, she burns out, not because she's untalented, but because she was never meant to play that instrument. That's what happens when you live out of alignment, when you keep trying to perform a life that doesn't reflect your soul's sound. Your anxiety isn't random. Your procrastination isn't rebellion. They're both saying, "This is not it." There's something you're not listening to. Even Napoleon Hill, in his writings about achievement, made this subtle but powerful distinction. Desire backed by faith knows no such word as impossible. But that faith isn't blind hustle. It's conviction born from alignment, from knowing you're walking toward something real. And maybe that's what you've been missing. You've been chasing what you were told matters, and your soul is quietly asking, but does it matter to you? Anxiety often rises when we betray ourselves, when we say yes to what we mean to reject, when we stay in places that drain us, when we try to function in environments that numb us. The cost of not listening? Burnout, numbness, quiet despair, but also lost years, lost parts of ourselves that we may never fully recover. So what's the alternative? It's not dropping everything and moving to the mountains. It's not quitting your job without a plan. It's starting to notice what your soul is resisting and why. It's becoming curious, not critical, gentle, not judgmental. Ask yourself, what drains me that used to excite me? Where do I go numb? What part of my life feels like a performance? What would I do if I trusted that my inner voice was wiser than the world's noise? These aren't quick questions, but they open a doorway, because the moment you stop blaming yourself for the resistance, you begin to learn from it. And what you'll often find is this: the soul doesn't resist growth. It resists falsehood. It resists roles you were never meant to play. It resists timelines that don't honor your nature. It resists goals that suffocate your aliveness. So maybe you're not lazy. Maybe you're just tired of being someone you're not. And maybe your anxiety isn't here to destroy you, but to wake you up. Living with meaning. How to build a life that feeds your soul. If you've made it this far, it's because something inside you is tired. Not just physically tired, but soul tired. Tired of pretending, tired of performing, tired of being productive in a life that no longer feels like yours. And yet, there's still something inside you that hasn't given up. That part of you that's still curious, still hungry for truth, still longing for meaning, even if it whispers instead of shouts. That part is your soul, and it doesn't need you to be perfect. It needs you to be honest, to stop asking, "What should I be doing?" and start asking, "What wants to come alive in me?" So let's talk about what it means, really means, to live with meaning, not as an idea, but as a way of being. Meaning isn't found, it's remembered. It's not out there, waiting for you in some job or relationship or destination. It's already inside you, layered beneath all the expectations you've inherited. To uncover it, you don't need more ambition. You need more attention to your truth, your story, your longing. Carl Jung once said, "Your vision will become clear only when you look into your heart. Who looks outside, dreams. Who looks inside, awakens." Living with meaning begins with this awakening, and it usually starts in a quiet, inconvenient moment. A moment of emotional discomfort, of questioning, of friction. The moment you finally admit, "I can't keep living like this." That's not weakness. That's the beginning of freedom. So how do you begin to build a life that feeds your soul? You start with small acts of alignment, because alignment creates energy, and energy creates clarity. Here are some places to begin. 1. Reconnect with what stirs you, even if it makes no sense. That book you keep thinking about, that conversation that lingers in your chest, that childhood interest you buried to be responsible. Start there. That's your soul knocking. 2. Redefine success, not by what impresses others, but by what brings you alive. Try this question: what would success feel like if no one could see it but me? 3. Create sacred space for slowness. Not every hour needs to be optimized. Create time to feel, to wonder, to listen. Meaning doesn't come from speed. It comes from depth. 4. Let go of roles that exhaust your truth. Maybe it's not your job. Maybe it's the version of yourself you've had to be in that job. Let go of roles that force you to abandon your voice. Even if you can't leave the situation yet, you can start being more honest inside it. 5. Ask yourself better questions. Instead of, "How can I be more productive?" try, "What would I create if I stopped being afraid of not being enough?" Instead of, "What's my next goal?" try, "What does my soul actually crave right now?" Because when you ask better questions, you unlock better answers. And those answers don't come from hustle. They come from listening. James Hillman said, "The soul has an appetite for meaning and will settle for almost anything when it's starving." Don't let your soul settle anymore. Your life doesn't need to be louder. It needs to be truer. And truth often begins with admitting what no longer fits, even if you once thought it was everything. The way forward isn't always dramatic. Sometimes it's as simple as honoring a small yes inside you. The yes to rest. The yes to curiosity. The yes to saying no when you always said yes. The yes to stop betraying yourself. You don't need to change your whole life overnight. You just need to stop abandoning the parts of you that already know the way. Because the version of you that's starving for meaning, that version is not weak, it's awake, and it's time to build a life that feeds it.